Hello, everyone. My name is Cale Weissman. I'm the editor here at Modern Retail. I just want to thank everyone for coming to the first edition of the Modern Retail Plus Talks, where we're going to be doing a few of these. I'll go more into that soon, but just want to welcome you. I'm sitting alone, obviously, but I have on my screen in front of me Colin Darretta, the CEO and founder of Wellpath, a digital supplement and wellness company. We'll go more into what Colin does and how business is going for. First, let's talk about Modern Retail Plus Talks. What are they? Well, they're just weekly scheduled Zoom calls where we talk with top executives and other people in the retail space about what's going on. We're going to be trying to cover a large breadth of different topics, so please keep tuning in. They're for our Modern Retail Plus members, and we really appreciate you guys tuning in, and we want to provide as deep and insightful a service as possible. There's a lot of uncertainty going on right now, and so we want to be able to talk about the issues that are most pertinent to everyone. And so this is one way that we're doing that. Please, we're part of this community. We want to learn from each other. If you have any feedback, please let us know. We want only the best and most insightful and helpful programming for you guys. So please keep us in the loop, and we'll be doing more events like these as time goes on. So the future ones, we have today's with Colin. We have one next week about brick and mortar's future with Catherine Pike. The week after that, we're talking about investing. And then following that, we have the future of grocery delivery, which will be fun. All of those we're trying to cover as wide topics, but narrow enough so that people really get some good information, so that we can all get some tips going forward. I want to start off by giving sort of a brief overview into what's going on in the DTC space right now, because we cover this a lot at Modern Retail, just digitally native, direct to consumer, whatever you want to call it. We were at an inflection point at the start of the year, and now things have accelerated to a point where it's kind of crazy. So everybody said, I wrote about it, my colleagues wrote about it, other places wrote about it, there was a reckoning on the horizon. What did that mean? Well, it meant that there for a while was a lot of venture capital funding going in, and then there was questions. Are these companies profitable? Are they sustainable? What kind of exit can they have if they have an over $1 billion valuation? That reckoning was coming supposedly at the beginning of this year, and we were going to see either consolidation, IPOs. We're going to see companies lose their unicorn moniker, and we were about to see how that would all shake out. And then what happened? But right now, we're in this new era where there's a global health crisis, and we're seeing an acceleration of all of these business trends. And it's really interesting and bizarre to see something that you talk about sort of in the short term and the slow term, and now it happened very quickly over the course of a month. There are companies who perhaps didn't raise enough funding 2 years ago and are running out of cash, and they're in a mad dash now to figure out, how do we get sales when all of our stores are closed? How do we become sustainable when path to profitability? All of that stuff is sort of coming to a head right now. And right now, DTC brands are needing to sort of relearn a playbook, and it's all about being conservative, which is something that they were taught not to do before. Instead of scale fast and grow big, they need to conserve cash, they need to figure out profitability, and they need to diversify revenue streams, which is something we're going to speak about today. Just sort of figure out, how do you make money when many of your revenue streams were completely chopped off? That is sort of the big question right now. And then right now, the mad dash, which Colin will talk about specifically, is how to build redundancies and sustainable pathways. That is the big question. Never before not never before, but I feel like redundancy has become a hot topic now in specifically online things and or online companies. And that's sort of the big question we're hoping to ask. While we're doing this, I'm going to be having a conversation with Colin. Colin first is going to be giving a little presentation about Wellpath, about his company, about how that's going. And then I'll have a conversation with him, just sort of talking with him straight about what's going on. We have a Q&A a little button, I believe, on your screen. If you want to ask a question, just click it, type it in, and we would love to answer any and all questions. So again, I want to thank you all for attending. Now I will kick it off with Colin. Let me unshare my screen.
Super. Give me 1 second. All right. Kale, are you able to see my screen?
I am.
Great. Let me just make sure I can, there we go. So a little bit of context. First of all, thanks for having me on, Kale. Glad to be with everyone today and sharing a little bit of, at least, if not insight and wisdom, some experiences and some mistakes that we've made throughout what has been an unprecedented period. So Wellpath, we started in 2016 as a customized nutritional supplement business. Think of us almost as care of before care of. We made a whole bunch of mistakes during that period. We're fortunate enough to figure out a few things as well, and started to develop a pretty large first-party audience of a couple million emails that enabled us to leverage a brand that we developed to launch non-customized products through other channels, entirely digital. So call it Amazon, Walmart, and a bunch of other smaller digital storefronts. That side of the business, the non-custom piece, we scaled to over 10 million of revenue since its launch in February of 2018. We did that without raising outside capital. And so by necessity, we had to be profitable. We kind of were sitting at the altar of cash flow before, I think, well, certainly before it was a thing over the last 6 months. I get my background on a personal level was as an ex-banker and ex-private equity professional. So I never fully understood the just burn at all costs to get scale and CPG methodology that so many people embraced. And I think I was fortunate that I didn't have, some investors talking in my ear and saying I just needed to get big at all costs. What we've gone and done now is we are scaling the business pretty rapidly to a goal of between 20 and 25 top line by the end of this year, continuing the same playbook that's gotten us thus far. And we're launching a new brand alongside Wellpath called Finn, which is a pet wellness company, which will come out in Q3 of 2020. So what I wanted to talk about is kind of what we're seeing in our business today. And the first thing I have to articulate is we're incredibly fortunate that we're in D2C, which generally obviously has done a lot better than anything that's relying on retail, and B, that we're in wellness as a category. And I think there is a secular shift toward people caring more about their personal wellness than perhaps ever before. And that's not just within products that touch immunity, it's broadly across the sector. People want to be healthier because for the first time in many people's lives, they're confronted with, scary things like their own mortality, which most people understandably don't like to give a lot of thought to. Immune support products, like elderberry in particular, have absolutely exploded in popularity. We happen to have almost by accident launched an elderberry product 3 weeks before the crisis started. And so we were a classic case of right place, right time, and happened to have enormous success with that. What that meant, though, for our entire business, as we've seen it lift, two things have happened. Our supply chain has become incredibly stressed, and even our fulfillment processes in terms of getting orders out to customers is, buckling. On the supply chain side, it comes down to things like getting the right ingredients for our products. A lot of these ingredients, even though the products are all manufactured in the US, come from global sources, and the global supply chain in many places is stressed or has collapsed in certain cases. So you have to find alternative sources where you never would have conceived of doing so before. And on the fulfillment side, in places like Amazon, which does account for a meaningful piece of our revenue, products categorized as non-essential are not getting prioritized to the tune of ship dates of over a month for Prime customers. And that's even exacerbated by that ruling isn't enforced uniformly across products. So one of our top selling products, which is an apple cider vinegar gummy, for a long time was considered non-essential, while our chief competitor was considered essential. So we lost a ton of market share to them. And since all of this is happening so suddenly, there isn't even a natural process for escalation and triage as you try to manage through it. So what does that mean as it relates to what we've done specifically to try to remediate these issues? And again, I just want to can't stress enough how fortunate we feel to have these issues in the sense that we still have demand for our products. So we're certainly aware and cognizant of that. So the first thing that we started to go deep on was how we procure our raw materials. That's started to mean that, for something like elderberry, the demand has increased dramatically. Customs is completely overloaded because everyone's trying to bring elderberry into the country. There's new customs rules in place, so everything's moving slower. The confluence of those two things make it much harder. Most of our manufacturers are facing partial or full factory shutdowns. We are fortunate that we had built some redundancies as it related to our manufacturing capacity previously. Were it not for those, we would have been really in a lurch. And then even things like labels, for instance, which I think a lot of people don't pay much mind to by virtue of, hey, it's just labels. Well, a lot of label manufacturers aren't considered essential businesses. And if you don't have a label for your product, you can't sell your product. And so starting to play triage there was something that immediately became central to our focus. And finally, fulfillment center shutdowns. So Amazon has for short times shut down several fulfillment centers. They have worked at half staff. One of our 3PLs ultimately had to shut down because they couldn't get considered as an essential business. Another 3PL we found was able to be considered as an essential business. And so navigating all of this in real time at the same time as obviously everybody else in the world is, so you only get partial attention from anyone, has become core to keeping our business afloat. Here's just a few touch points on how we've actually been responding. I think the first thing that we as a leadership team sat down and agreed upon is we were going to operate with the base expectation that parts of our supply chain or fulfillment chain would fail completely and unexpectedly with almost no warning. And therefore, we needed to have processes in place for preparing for every one of them. As they started to happen, we actually created a list of every person who we could touch who would be a favor for us to call in. We hopefully believe that we've been great partners to whether it be our manufacturers, our suppliers, or even our fulfillment centers over the past years. And we were going to, call those favors in to reap dividends today, because the reality is people simply have a limited amount of bandwidth, and that is under duress right now. So you have to do whatever you can to get yourself to the top of the queue. The other thing was we started proactively building out redundancies even before certain parts of the supply chain collapsed. That meant, for instance, we now have 3 label manufacturers. We now have multiple 3PLs. We're stocking inventory at all of them. It's inefficient from a capital allocation perspective, no doubt. So it's perhaps not a luxury that everyone has. But what I think about is, well, I'm giving up some of my ultimate margin on the business in this time of crisis. I'm keeping us operational. I'm still getting our customers the products they need while many of my competitors are running out of stock. So in return, I'm seeing an increase in my business, and I'm willing to make up for my lost margins through these inefficiencies in volume. And finally, we've been very focused on shoring up supply. So whether that means getting involved in doing actually, securing raw materials to a greater degree than we had before. In some cases, our manufacturers or partners dealt with the majority of that. Or in many cases, it means deploying a lot more capital to sit on larger reserves of inventory than we would have ever before. We know that's working capital efficient. We also acknowledge that not every business has the capital flexibility to, but because of the risk associated with, we just don't know if elderberry remains, for instance, at an elevated level for the next 6 to 9 months, the global supply chain just won't be able to keep up. There just isn't enough of it to put online. And so we want to get as much as we can in-house now, on account of, we think that there's a real potentiality for something like that. We think those sort of risks we've identified a bunch of them. We're certain that there's a bunch we haven't identified, and therefore we are just going overboard on trying to really put all the fail safes in place that we can. So when we think about some of the broader implications in terms of what this means for our business, for call it, the second half or fourth quarter of 2020 and 2021, we're rethinking all of our supplier relationships. What we found is there's a flight to quality probably toward the big suppliers by virtue of they're the ones who are still getting the best allocations of the raw materials that are precious right now, where they're oftentimes not the cheapest supplier because, hey, that they're the old guard, so therefore they command a premium. But the extra point of margin that you give up to, or 2 points of margin, whatever the number is, to give up to go with someone who is going to be able to weather the storm and be a dependable partner through it is worth it. So that's one thing that this has catalyzed for us. We're also readying ourselves for new distribution opportunities. We do think that ultimately, obviously, other channels are going to come back, but the consumer demand landscape might be, if not forever shifted for a meaningful period into the future. I don't think people are suddenly going to stop caring about health and wellness and immunity in particular after the virus has run its course or its initial course. I think there is going to be a long-term trend toward people wanting to take better care of themselves, because this will for years change how people think about preparation. And so we think that store shelves are going to be stocking more wellness products, more products of particular SKU types as a result. And that's the general response we've been getting from our retail contacts. We'd been planning a retail launch at the end of this year. That might be pushed to 2021 now, but we were in those active conversations, and that's what we're hearing from them. And finally, we're starting to think about a shifting product mix. We do think that, we're careful not to make any promise of, hey, we're going to sell you something that's going to make you unlikely to get corona or survive it, or any other disease. We're not selling panaceas here. We've never pretended to. We do think that we believe in our products. Elderberry has a ton of support on its efficacy for supporting an healthy immune system. And so leaning into products like our new elderberry launch and changing some of the products we intend to launch over the course of the rest of this year and next year has been something that we're focused on as well. Admittedly, a little bit less so right now as we still play triage, but that'll probably come to the fore over the course of the summer. So in summation, focus on your supply chain. If that's not going to hold up, even if you've got demand, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. Build the redundancies where you didn't think you needed them. Nothing's too small. Your label manufacturer, if they can't get you labels, can break your business. And shift your long-term thinking. Take into consideration that what's going on now is going to echo through perhaps the next decade or decades to come. And it's going to have to impact your strategic approach. Obviously, this isn't comprehensive at all. There's so much more that we've been dealing with. And if anyone ever wants to have a longer discussion, you can reach me at my email below. And back to you, Kale.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. That was great. So now we're going to do a Q&A. I'm just going to talk with you a little bit. Again, for everyone watching, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button. Type them in. We'd love to have them answered. This is about you guys getting your answers as much as me getting my answers. So I guess my first question is, can you just dig in a little bit? So you mentioned that because of the coronavirus, you've seen a sales lift, and it was a lot of immunity stuff. Can you just give a little bit more color? What did you see? Did you almost run out of stock? What were sort of the dynamics that shifted over the course of weeks, if not day?
Sure. So immediately as it became clear how bad this was going to be, we obviously saw a ton of panic buying take place across every single one of our SKUs. Typically, we think that it takes us 2 to 3 months to spread the word about a new product and to get it to some scale. our elderberry product, without a single, maybe, de minimis amount of marketing, started to just take off because we had just come into a bunch of supply and everyone was running out of stock. So rapidly, almost overnight, we were selling, over 1,000 bottles of that a day. We ultimately did run out of stock. We were fortunate that as soon as we saw the increased lift, we, did everything in our power to get access to more inventory. And we're really fortunate that we're working with people who helped us achieve that. But what we've seen is a lift of probably about 30% across every single one of our SKUs, notwithstanding the one SKU where we weren't considered an essential product and our main competitor was. And so therefore we just lost market share to them, because the death knell for anybody right now is, we're so conditioned to receiving things in the next, if not 2 days, certainly within the next week, that the moment someone realizes you're not going to get a product for a month, you lose that customer. What we found actually is there was an enormous amount of customers who were purchasing it, and then because Amazon was saying it's not shipping for a month, we're actually going in and canceling it. A phenomenon we obviously never had in our business before. And we've seen a lot of that demand lift persist, not at quite the levels that it was during the panic buying phase, which we wouldn't expect it to. I think, not to say that anything is returned to any level of normalcy, but I do think people are realizing that this isn't a moment in time, but this is going to be a protracted thing. And so buying has resumed a little bit more of a normal behavior, still probably 15% higher than we ever had for most of those SKUs in the past, by virtue of there's probably a lot of people who made their purchases in stores who are now going onto channels like our website, like Amazon, like Walmart, and purchasing online. And since we weren't in retail, obviously that's just a broad business lift for us.
So I've talked with other people about this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, just with the mad dash and the panic buying with Amazon, and then the bottleneck and all that stuff that you experienced. Did you use that as an opportunity to build your DTC business? Were you trying to get more people to go to your website? Has that crossed your mind? Sort of, how have you approached that?
Sure. So the answer is absolutely, because we are seeing broadly across advertising, customer acquisition costs are going down. It's not something, candidly, it's been about a month, and I'd say we were spending 90% of our time on playing triage on our supply chain and figuring out how to actually get, for instance, how to get our apple cider vinegar product approved to be considered an essential product so it can ship on a regular timeline, which just happened last night, thankfully. Thank you. That was quite the relief. And so that's been the vast majority of our focus. That being said, as we spend advertising dollars, we've certainly shifted some towards our D2C channel, because we're able to continue shipping on much closer to a regular timeline, not without some delays, absolutely. But, compared to channels like Amazon, fortunately, our other products were considered essential, so we haven't encountered the same shipping delays that we did on Pure. So Pure was the one place where we started redirecting people towards other places. The other thing that we set up was, with Amazon specifically, started using a 3PL to do fulfilled by merchant, because we could actually ship much faster than, ironically enough, than the Amazon Prime shipping.
How did using a 3PL as opposed to FBA impact sort of the perception of people buying it? If they didn't see the Prime, did that have an impact?
Sure. So yes, so that's it. That was probably the issue, is it's a negligible amount of help to have FBM set up relative to FBA, because you lose the Prime badge. And most people don't do the research to actually go look and see, oh, well, FBM, I could have it in 3 or 4 days, and Prime, I'm going to have it in 30 days. Most people just default to looking for that Prime badge. So it didn't help as much as we would have hoped, right? Some of that, the gains that we would have otherwise had were lost by virtue of losing the Prime badge. I know in my conversations with people over at Amazon that that's something they're aware of, because obviously they're so consumer centric that they're not doing their customers any favors if they're ultimately actually showing them a product that's shipping in 30 days if there's at the same price an alternative that's faster.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I want to repeat, if you have any questions, hit the Q&A button, which should be on your screens. I'm interested to know, for the non-essential product that you said you were shifting to your D2C channels, did that insulate it at all? How did that work? What was how did you go about the marketing plan for that? And what was was there a good impact from it?
Sure. I think in many cases, it was just redirecting the same spend that would have been driven towards places like Amazon. Actually, we also started driving people into Walmart because I was still shipping on time, and to try to go gain rank in that marketplace. Interestingly, as this hit Amazon, for instance, we saw that Walmart business probably lifted by 300%. So our Walmart, it's probably hasn't been well publicized, but one winner of the stress that has undertaken Amazon's fulfillment centers is Walmart. People are going and buying products there because the delivery times are much quicker. So we either drove the eyeballs into the Walmart channel, or we just drove them into our D2C website. The benefit of our D2C site, obviously, is then we can get someone's email, we can put them into a continuity program, we can personalize the communications that we're making to them to a much greater degree than Amazon allows for. The reason we oftentimes send people into Amazon is conversion rates are much higher, as well as it creates the velocity in the Amazon listing that keeps you, at the top of the rankings.
Absolutely. So you mentioned this in your talk a little bit, and I want to sort of add some color to it. You're probably going to change your product mix. You're looking into the future. How are you approaching your forecasting, specifically because we're in such an unprecedented time? People panic shop. People are looking for specific things. The entire dynamics in terms of ship times and what's available online has shifted. How are you going about the actual forecasting to make it so that you have the products your consumers want?
Sure. I think fortunately there's a lot of great SaaS tools out there that I think you can look at Amazon as a proxy for demand, in D2C and on other channels as well. So it's pretty easy to see how the lift in immunity products or elderberry is, 5x what it was 4 months ago, right? And so we know that steady state at some point will exist somewhere between 4 months ago and today. I would wager, but I don't have much basis for it. I would wager it'll be closer to 4 months ago than it is today in a year or two's time. I think it'll still be higher than what our old steady state was for immunity products. But we do think that there's an immediate opportunity over the next 12 months to launch products that are high quality products and get the word out there and have them do well in the early days and still ultimately be products for the long term that will be successful SKUs in our business. To wit, we are launching a general immunity product with vitamin C and kind of elderberry and tried and true echinacea, all the ingredients that most people are well familiar with. We're launching that as kind of a counterpart to our elderberry gummies, and that will be coming out in the next 2 weeks. That was a product that was on our roadmap, but it was on our roadmap for 4 months from now. And so we've moved a lot of things around in terms of prioritizing products that seem like they would meet consumer demand that exists right now, that is at a higher point than it has been before. I think there are most of these products right now are out of stock, or the people who are in stock are committing some degree of price gouging. So I think we feel really excited about the idea of all of the products in our line are reasonably priced. We don't have anything that's over, I think, $23. And we're excited to launch something that's going to be consistent with that and meet a real consumer need right now, and feel that we're also doing some good in terms of bringing back a bit more realistic pricing model to the market that's gotten a little out of control.
So this is a question that we got from the audience, but it fits perfectly in with what we're talking about right now. And so just in terms of this forecasting, looking at product mix, what other wellness trends will accelerate coming out of this crisis, do you think? And how are you responding? How are you going to respond to that?
Sure. I think broadly defined, I mean, a big one that has been seeing a lift, but it will only continue to accelerate is, mental wellness and anxiety management. I wouldn't be surprised to see businesses popping up that are, as opposed to being product centric, i.e., for instance, Gravity Blanket, right, is a product centric company, to see condition centric businesses spinning up, like, hey, we're going to tackle anxiety from a multitude of levels, i.e., we're going to have a supplement, we're going to have a Gravity Blanket type product, and we're going to have 8 other things, right? I think mental health is obviously something that is probably brought to the forefront right now, as this level of isolation and the stress that we all have for our loved ones and our communities is pushing us to greater levels of anxiety. It's already been an epidemic with elevated cortisol levels, and the fact that we've got unhealthy blue light and screens around us 24 hours a day, and people are sleeping less restfully than ever before, which dovetails into the other one that I think will continue to gain traction, is sleep health. And I think they're somewhat linked, but that's also typically, 5 years ago, before Why We Sleep was written, no one really talked, or certainly there wasn't a common discussion over what is sleep health, right? People would generally talk about, hey, you should get 7 or 8 hours of sleep, but that was probably the extent of it. Now, creating different products to optimize people's sleep, not necessarily sleep trackers, which have existed for a while, and I think most of them aren't that effective. If anything, there's a lot of research that shows that they create anxiety, because then you're like trying to sleep better. But products that actually help make, encourage you to be a better sleeper without trying to track it and make it analytical, or supplements around it, or white noise machines, etc. Elevating that space, I think, will also be big.
How are you going about, because your bread and butter is supplements, and some of these are outside the field of supplements. How are you going about
Sure.
figuring that out, testing, just like how are you approaching sort of these brand new things that you haven't done, and you're not in an office right now and your team is all dispersed?
Yeah, so I don't know that we're probably not going to go make a Gravity Blanket competitor, but we are trying to think about what are the big secular trends that are taking place, and what are the things that are going to be more top of mind for people. In cases where we're not going to go make the product, it's fine thinking about who is out there doing it and finding potential partnership opportunities. We built Wellpath. Part of the ability to do it profitably was we built it on the back of doing partnerships with other brands, where we could cross-pollinate audience attention. So as opposed to going and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on Facebook to advertise to Equinox's audience, why not go partner with Equinox and get exposure to their audience that way, and give them exposure to ours, because we're not trying to start a gym and they're not trying to start a supplement company. And I think that's been our ideology from the get-go, and that ladders into capital efficiency. And I think we will double down on that coming out of this, because for the first time since we've been building this business, people actually respect the fact that we've been focused on trying to preserve cash and not pursue the route of growth at all costs.
So I want to get into that, because I bet you there are people listening who I don't know what their strategies are in terms of growth, but they're probably VC backed, and they've read or heard about, if not followed, certain ethos when it came to growing a business. And yours is a little bit different. You try to grow sustainably. You don't have VC funding. You've been profitable sort of from the beginning. What are the lessons that you would give in terms of approaching a balance sheet and cash flow now for these businesses that may have not have had different approaches to looking at them before, and now there's been a complete upending of the market?
Sure. Yeah, and I certainly am in no place to pontificate about this, because what's worked for us certainly doesn't necessarily work for everybody else. I think one thing that we've tried to remain disciplined about is regularly retrenching and seeing what channels are working, and trying to cut away at the fat when there isn't. I heard in a candidate I was interviewing recently, he articulated it kind of like, once you've got a spend that's X, and a team of that size a team appropriately sized to manage it, there's kind of organizational inertia around, well, we need to keep the team this size and we need to keep the spend this much. We regularly on a quarterly basis have always looked at what things are really working for us and what aren't. And just a discipline around unit economics. I mean, I don't believe, all due respect to some people who have achieved it, but I don't believe that if you don't have good unit economics by the time you've hit $100 million, right? Like a mattress at $100 million run rate versus a $400 million run rate, the mattress unit economics probably aren't going to change that much in between then. And so I think a lot of discipline around unit economics and being honest about your margins should be defined not by traditional, you shouldn't be looking at a gross profit margin. It should really be a contribution margin with all of your marketing expenses baked in. And if that's not healthy enough to be throwing off cash and covering your head count in your office space, then you need to really reevaluate the channels that you're spending on. I do think, to your point, that a lot of investors are retrenching right now and allocating capital to play triage on their portfolio companies that are really hurting. And so people, and unfortunately, I know people who are in this position who only have 3 months of runway because they were following the advice of their investors in some cases and growing at this really fast clip. They're not able to turn to profitability quickly enough, which brings me, I guess, to my last point. Even if you're at a burn, and I totally understand, particularly on your way, certainly prior to $10 million of top line, I understand that many people would be at a burn. But having a way to turn to profitability in 2 to 3 months in case things like this happen, it's also, the sword of Damocles isn't hanging over your head. It removes anxiety from your life. It makes you a better manager and you sleep better at night. So it's something I would advocate for.
So here's another question from the audience, and it sort of goes into this, but and it also just goes into the general way that you've built your brand. And so what is your approach to retail? Is it about CAC or is it about brand recognition? So are you just looking into people knowing what Wellpath is, or is it that you chose cheap ways to make it so that you got more customers?
Sure. So our approach to retail right now, and all subject to change, is we view it as the largest kind of outdoor advertisement we could get. When we think about our potential customer journey through an omni-channel strategy, in many cases, we think the first purchase will take place at retail. That'll be our lowest margin purchase. So I'm not particularly concerned with making money there, so long as it's profitable. But we're talking, paper thin margins ultimately. And then the second purchase is going to, provided it's the same, we want to have price consistency across retail, D2C, and Amazon, Walmart, and any other channels. So then the second purchase will take place most likely on an Amazon or a Walmart where someone already has an account and is accustomed to their shopping behavior taking place there. They're just doing it for the sake of convenience, but they discovered us in retail. And then the third, well, maybe it's the fourth or fifth purchase, once they become a real evangelist for us and start loving the product, will be on our D2C side where they can get bundles that we only do on D2C, which obviously then will provide discounts where there is an option for continuity, again, which would have a discount associated with it. And so then, it's only our real, Wellpath lovers that will ultimately be our primary D2C customers. And that's fine, right? We want D2C to be the place where it's almost entirely continuity focused, and it will be our highest margin side of the business. Amazon's incredibly profitable for us, as is Walmart. And so we're happy for those to be huge portions of our business as well. And then retail to be kind of the top of the funnel.
Absolutely. Just going into more of the questions in the Q&A. Do you think that fewer brands will choose to go to physical retail to expand the revenue as a result of this?
Not necessarily. I think that there's going to be, as I mentioned, I think there's going to be a shift in what retailers want to stock on their shelves. There could also be some change in terms of negotiation, right? Because obviously doing retail is a huge working capital risk. So I do think people will be less apt, if you're a small business, to do a bet the farm moment on retail, because right now I certainly know people who unfortunately did that, and now their inventory is basically all trapped within the retailer, and they have payments coming due to their suppliers, and they're stuck. I think, if you're a small business, that can effectively put you out of business. And I don't think people will continue doing that by virtue of this being so fresh in their minds. That being said, I do think retail will come back in a significant fashion. We are not forever changed to no one's shopping in retail anymore. I do think that people will think of retail as a channel where they at least need to be break even, if not have some sort of margin. A lot of D2C businesses built their financial model without, and understandably without an eye towards eventually going into retail, because for a long time, people said, well, online commerce is going to put retail out of business. What we've seen for many categories, not all, is that's just clearly not the case. And so therefore, I think from day one, when someone starts to build their economic model, they need to be planning for, hey, how do I make this product work at retail? And a lot of people just day one don't figure that out. So then they go into retail and they're effectively losing a little bit of money on every sale, which then, of course, you need lots of venture financing to achieve that.
Yeah, and here, this will be the last question I'll take, but I love this question. Will you change some of the terms you have with your retailers?
I don't know that we'll try, is the short answer. We will certainly try. I don't know how much leverage we have. As a business that's doing, under $20 million of top line right now, and we are optimistic, obviously, that we'll scale well beyond that, but we're still a relatively small player vis-a-vis some of the big guys in the industry, and retailers like Walmart and Target just have so much more leverage over us. That being said, I do think that people who are willing to dip their toes in the water sooner rather than later as this comes back will find themselves with perhaps slightly more negotiating power than they had before, though it will still pale in comparison to the big guys, unless you start to get some real zeitgeist around the brand you're building and the products, where you become the next Vital Proteins, for instance, and then the retailer comes to you and is like, I need to have you in my store, because if I don't and my competitor does, then I'm really losing out. And obviously we would love to scale our brand and the recognition to that point, but we're not going to assume that we'll be able to. We're optimistic that we'll get better terms, but certainly still hard.
Absolutely. All right, Colin, this has been so fascinating. Thank you so much for chatting. And thanks to everybody for tuning in to this first inaugural Modern Retail Plus talk. We have more down the line. Check your email, check our website, modernretail.co. Again, I'm Cale Weissman, an editor here at Modern Retail. And I just wanted to say thanks for tuning in. I'll see you all next week.
Thanks, everyone.